personally, for me, I had a thirst for knowledge, and I actually read a book or two outside of school and learned some things on my own, but a lot of people don't have that drive or even care to do that.
Mage podcast coming at you. What's today's date? March 12th, 2014. Jeez. Unbelievable. It's been a little while since I've done a podcast, and this gentleman might have even been on my last one. I can't remember, but Dave Benner's in the house. What's up, Dave?
What's up, Mage? How are you? Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
It's awesome.
It's the same with the guests and the host on both sides. It seems like the good people I know in my life and myself, all in this group, were always truthfully wanted to do this type of stuff more. And it's hard to really just go, I'm just going to, you know what, let's just podcast on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or whatever, I mean, I don't know, it's fun to throw it in the schedule, it really is. So, and plus, following you, website, Facebook post, whatever, you definitely have an air about yourself as far as the confidence of citing where your views and opinions and stuff are derived from.
Sure.
And to me, that's how I strive to interact with people too. So whether it's history or political views or just probably the outlook on anything, it seems like, you're of that mindset. So I don't know. I think to me that's one of the cool things about you, where that's why I always enjoy hanging out and whatnot, because I feel like we both learn from each other, and I feel like I learn a lot more of the stuff that is like real scholarly knowledge. I don't know what you learn from me. You learn like weird hobbies and stuff from me, tricks of the trade, street knowledge. No, I don't know. But from you, man, I feel like I learned quite a lot of stuff. So thanks for coming on. And
no, thank you for the kind words. I think that we have to ground our principles somewhere, and a lot of the avenues that we can do to ground them in is to just invoke the founding generation, who really were masters of history in many levels. And while that generation was as fallible as anyone else, I think that generation realized more than anyone else that man is fallible, and thus government of man would be fallible. But thank you for the comments. I've learned much from you too as well.
Thanks, dude. Right a little bit before this, I was on Dave Benner's podcast. We recorded a podcast for the Dave Benner Show, Brush Fires of the Mind.
That's right.
The Dave Benner Show. And
nice.
I should just start smoking cigarettes. That's what I should do. I could probably do this for a living if I smoke cigarettes.
You just right there sounded exactly like the guy that introduces my podcast.
That's awesome, man. But no, Dave, how long you been doing your podcast then, man?
I've been doing my podcast for about 3 months. It's a weekly podcast. Episodes come out on Sunday. Okay. So I love doing it. I focus on usually a different constitutional or historical topic.
It's, to put it in like street terms, it's good shit. So I encourage you to check out Dave Benner's podcast. It's DAVE spacebar once or twice, BENNER. But yeah, every time Dave comes over, man, it's a learning experience. We're chilling. I had some leftovers. I had some pork butt, saffron rice, and some Cuban black beans, vegetables. We always eat all our vegetables in my house. But it was a good time, man. Chill out, have a beer. It's a Third Street Brewery. That's out of Cold Spring, Minnesota. And their Bitter Neighbor, it's very, very good. It's one of my favorite beers. It's a black IPA, full of hops, but it's super dark too, so the hops are kind of neutralized. They don't come through a ton, but you taste it for sure. And for people who like black IPAs, my favorite above this is the Indeed Midnight Rider. And you haven't had either one of those, right?
I've heard of that, but I haven't had that one.
It's super awesome. Yeah. And so do you like the dark beers in general, or
yeah, I do.
You said you like this.
It's not my favorite.
Okay.
I do. This is all right. I tend to like the reds a little bit more, and I like Scottish ales. I really like Fat Tire, and that's one of my go-to.
There's a. Have you been up to Dangerous Man Brewing Company in Northeast Minneapolis?
I have not, sir.
They have like a Scottish ale, I want to say, and they also have is it a Kolsch? Kolsch? Is that the type?
Yeah,
of Kolsch?
I've had Kolsch before.
It's like a light. It's like almost like a Pilsner, I want to say, where you really get that like barley flavor coming through. It's like that bite, like a very European style beer. So I was very impressed with Dangerous, man. We went up there. The only thing was they didn't have the food truck. It was like 22 below zero. We were starving, so I think we had 2 beers there.
Food trucks are great too.
And we got food. Yeah, you go to Indeed, you go to 612. A lot of these breweries in Fulton, can't forget Fulton by the Metrodome, and all those Minneapolis, Twin City area breweries. It seems like the top tier ones, they always have a food truck rotating around. And I tell you, some of those food trucks, there's a lamb burger. It's like $6 or $7, but it's always at Indeed on, I don't know, when you go Wednesdays or something, but $6 or $7, a la carte, like no fries, anything, just a little lamb burger. But I'll pay it every time. It's that good. If I go there for beer and the lamb burger's there, I'm buying one. Even if I just ate Old Country Buffet twice, I'll get the lamb burger, man.
It's a problem when you've eaten at Old Country Buffet more than once without moving on, in my estimation. But maybe I'm a snob. That's elitist Dave coming through here.
Sorry. In St. Cloud, on Sundays we were always hungover, man. We used to go to Chinese buffet. God, I can't remember which freaking friend it was, but the Chinese dude that owned the Chinese buffet, it was the east side of St. Cloud, and we used to abuse that place, like 2-3 hour stays, you know. And I remember one time I skipped out on this day or whatever, a group of friends, I don't remember what buddy it was, and he was in there, and the guy came up to the table and like slapped his hands down because it was like a lunch dinner. They were there all day, and he was like, "It's all you can eat, not you eat all day." And he just yells at the guys like,
was that the exact quote?
I think that's exact.
Wow.
I remember that for 10 years, dude.
How could you not?
Oh my God. How did this start? All right. So, this is too funny. Dave Benner, I prepped up a clip and it just randomly started as we were making fun of eating all day at a Chinese buffet, which I have friends who have done it, but not me. Anyways, Judge Andrew Napolitano, what's his credentials? Do you know? You probably know more than I do.
Yeah, he was, I believe, a circuit court judge in New York or New Jersey. And but now he's a senior judicial analyst at Fox News. He's got about 8 books, very well respected in the liberty.
I've loved the guy, and I think it's too bad that the Civil War has to be portrayed in like this mass media way. And I'm not saying it has to, there's 2 sides to it and it's portrayed with one side. I'm not really saying that. What I'm saying is the facts are always washed under the rug for the power structures narrative. How about that, right? Do you agree with that? Like in some, hey, we just did a thing on Iran, we could go back to the Persian Empire, but like the power structures narrative, when Alexander the Great took over Persepolis, he translated all the Persian books, all the historical facts, everything to Greek, and then he burned all the Persian stuff, you know? And that's today what they can do by taking over every media outlet and then portraying like the power structure narrative. I don't know. Do you have anything to say about that? Do you find that, like, even with American history?
Yeah,
'cause that's your specialty. I always like, sure. I don't want to paint you with that brush, but that's what I have to, because that's what I'm, you know, that's what I enjoy talking to you about, because you always are on that tip, and it just really educates me. It gives me new perspectives. But anyways, go ahead. I guess. I mean, I'm sure. Feel free to relate it. I guess what I'm saying to the colonial America, sure. That type of structure or whatever. But anyways, do you?
Yeah, I think, I mean, they say that history is written by the victors, and I think
sure.
in this case it's generally true. The narrative that one receives mostly in school, at least in my opinion and my experience, is one that kind of heralds the Union as the benevolent force that kind of ended slavery, and all sorts of opinions related to the legitimacy of secession are completely suppressed from our society, despite the fact that our founding generation was largely a secessionist society that believed in the necessity at some times. And that's not to give praise to the Confederacy by any means, but we're often, you know, taught that Lincoln is a deified and sanctified figure, the best of all presidents, and I find qualms with that argument.
Well, since I already pulled up this Judge Andrew Napolitano on Jon Stewart here, let me at least try to play it, if I can figure this dang thing out. But, you know, my podcasts are a little relaxed. They're more of a beer drinking style. I think here it is, so I'm going to stop it, I think, at a certain point.
Sure.
Mini points here, but
16th.
This should be coming
I
through,
am a
so here we go.
contrarian
Here's a
on
clip of
Abraham
Andrew.
Lincoln, and I bemoan the fact that he's been mythologized. At the time that he was the president of the United States, slavery was dying a natural death all over the Western world. It had just been expired by legislation in
I didn't want to stop it that soon, but actually, his point there, I think, is a deep point. And let me set it off, and I'm sure you can talk more about me, or more than me about this subject. But I think that the thing with slavery ending with a civil war is a unique fact that's very simple, that is not taught at any point that I remember about the Civil War, which is, I think countries like Brazil had more slaves than the United States. And or I might be wrong, but and or their per capita economy was based more on slavery. But a lot of these countries that were more into what we call chattel slavery, or the pure making a human being an item, which is different than indentured servitude in the Roman style slavery, which was, some people say there was chattel, but either way, it's always, you'll hear, especially like what is coined as the progressive left, they love to use chattel slavery to say like you can't compare black slaves to white slaves and or black slaves to Roman slaves. And that's okay. I mean, so if that's the term, chattel slavery, that we're using, Brazil and a lot of these countries were more into this, let's call it the slave game, and they got rid of it without killing a bunch of people. And to me, that's like the easiest point to get, but that's the number one propaganda piece, that you have to ignore that point and or deny that point and or act like it's not that just of a point, when to me, to quantify, to really look at how slavery can affect a country and how that country can get out of it, once you do that, I mean, if you were doing heroin and 10 of your friends were doing it, 2 die, 6 get out of it, a couple start using it. Once you like look at the people who got out of it and you go, okay, these guys got out of it. Okay, let me look at the 6 got out of it and let me look at how they did it. Like, you're not going to look at the guys who died, you know? Sure. And that's what's so crazy about the religious notion of the Civil War and the slavery notion of it, is the shame is that you had to kill a bunch of people over slavery. So anyways, feel free to just go off on that. No, I can't say much more, but that's how I feel. So.
I'm so glad you brought this point up, and it's absolutely accurate. Brazil is a perfect instance. Around the time of the U.S. Civil War, most of the Western world and some parts of the other world had freed their slaves or manumitted them through completely peaceful means, whether it be to compensate the slave owners, and other methodologies like localized governments determining that, you know, people were free and could not participate in slavery, much like what actually happened in our nation prior to the Civil War. A lot of people would escape to the North. The feds tried to enforce the Fugitive Slave Act, sometimes successfully, other times unsuccessfully, as northern states objected to that. But a great book that talks about this and how slavery was eradicated peacefully throughout the world is Jim Powell's Greatest Emancipations. It becomes clear after reading that book that 800,000 people did not have to die for slavery to die a death in the United States, and slavery didn't even die a death until after the 13th Amendment's ratification, which was ratified about 8 months after Lincoln's death. So,
anyways, we could talk through this whole piece, so we'll try to keep it going here.
Sure.
And no, I'm talking about myself, because you're matching how long I'm going, so do not stop yourself, is I guess what I'm saying. Here we go. Let's see.
England, and the southern plantation owners were on the cusp of it dying here. Instead of allowing it to die or helping it to die or even purchasing the slaves and then freeing them, which would have cost a lot less money than the Civil War cost, Lincoln set about on the most murderous war in American history.
We're going to talk about that. Please welcome back to the program, Judge Andrew Napolitano. Come on out here.
They act like they're best friends. I mean, they probably are. That's just so weird about, like,
they're cordial guys.
The people in the limelight. Look at him, he's fucking waving the fans like, bring it up, man.
The feeling is mutual, Johnny. You are a warm-hearted man, you are a garrulous man. I enjoyed it very much. This took me aback.
What took you back? My weight loss?
You are, first of all...
Yeah, by the way, he lost like... How many pounds? I just talked over
80,
him. 80 pounds? It looks like 100. Either way, he lost a lot of weight.
What you said about... You are an eloquent...
Good for him. I love this guy.
Of liberty. Of freedom. To then listen to your comments about slavery seems the antithesis. You seem to discuss it in cool, rational, economic terms, rather than the terms that you use to describe liberty.
But my discussion was about Lincoln. My condemnation of slavery is second to none. You've read my book, Dred Scott's Revenge.
Oh my God, I've read it twice.
Okay. Ready for a pop quiz? It is the standard libertarian assault on slavery, which was the most horrific, unnatural, amoral institution in the history of the world.
Then let me ask you this. If it is the most amoral, something
Horrific,
horrific, unnatural, this idea that, oh, it will just die a natural death seems to me to be the antithesis of someone who praises the founders for standing up to what you have called the tyranny of England. There is not one thing on the Declaration of Independence that rises to the level of slavery.
The Declaration of Independence was written and signed by slave owners.
Exactly.
It's their moral dilemma. The same person who
Right.
wrote, "We are endowed by our Creator with
Right.
certain inalienable rights," Thomas Jefferson, owned slaves.
I love how he's addressing it before the Stewart side can ask that, because that's their favorite
Revolutionary
argument,
founders
you
going to
know.
war, with Lincoln not going to war, but standing back for the hope that this institution will die a death.
If the slaves had gone to war against their slave owners, and I had been alive, I would have been with them. I would have helped finance, fund, and lead that revolt.
Are you familiar with slavery?
I'm very familiar with it.
That is not the option. How is it? So you are upset. Wait a minute.
No.
You.
This is so funny. All right, so what I
There's
want to
so much
say,
I
I
can
guess,
say,
is
yeah.
they asked him a moral question and he gave him a moral answer, and then I don't even want to use the red herring or whatever, maybe it's not, but he basically said, like, okay, are you familiar with slavery? And it was funny, and I get it. They hug each other. Okay, by the way, they kissed each other in the cheek when they came in there. They're like best buddies or whatever. You know, they're very like affectionate towards one another to prove that they're really not gonna hash into this slavery thing, because this is a serious topic that can you know, put a big pockmark on your face in show business if you slip up in one sentence, like an Andrew Napolitano type guy talking about slavery. So anyways, I don't know, do you have anything to say that you heard right away? Okay, go ahead.
Oh yeah, so much I can say about that. All right, so
Okay, by the way, here's why I stopped it, I guess. It's almost halfway through the clip, and they're still on the character of the personal character is what I'm saying, the internal character of Andrew Napolitano here. And it has nothing to do, which is okay. It's an interview about him. I mean,
Yeah.
but it proves, if you want to quantify it, we're halfway through the thing, and that's still what they're on, is like this guy. So anyways.
Sure. No, there's a lot to say. The biggest thing that I wanted to say in reaction to this is Stewart makes it sound like Lincoln wanted to end slavery from the get-go. That was his ultimate objective, and that's not really the case. If you look
Hell no, it's not.
If you look at Abraham Lincoln's first inaugural address spoken in April of 1861, he definitively backs a constitutional amendment known as the Corwin Amendment, which would have codified the legitimacy of slavery for all time.
Yeah.
It would have ironically become the 13th Amendment. So Lincoln's concern was not really about slavery. It was really about secession. And you can see that going throughout the war, because even by the words of the Emancipation Proclamation, in that text, Lincoln sanctions the existence of slavery in the slave states that remained loyal to the Union. A lot of people don't know that, but Missouri, Delaware, Maryland,
I remember
Kentucky.
hearing that, but I don't actually, in a way, like I do not know that.
Yeah.
I remember hearing something because I've read, I read Thomas DiLorenzo's The Real Lincoln. I bet you read
Love
that.
it. It's one of my favorite books.
But have you ever read the reviews of it where they highlight certain passages that Thomas DiLorenzo took out of context?
Sure, DiLorenzo has been attacked upon by academia on all angles, but
Some of them I read, though, kind of made me mad at DiLorenzo when I went and read the full quotes again.
Sure.
So I don't know if you have anything like that or no. Because it's been years, so I can't cite it myself.
I back DiLorenzo's narrative. He released the book to massive scrutiny in 2003. It's generally a very good narrative in my estimation.
It is, okay.
In my estimation, but I can't.
I really liked
specifically
it, but then it
defend
was
certain-
like, you read a book like that, any book that shakes your foundation, in my mind, or movie or anything, you want to really attack what just attacked your frame of reference.
Sure.
Because sometimes things that shake your frame of reference of anything in life, whether it's a book or a female, as a single, young, attractive, in shape 28-year-old male.
Both of us.
Oh, yeah. So, right. I'm doing a plug for myself over here.
Yeah, I love it.
Oh man. Anyways,
No,
sure. But I don't know. I guess like the whole Di Lorenzo thing, it shook my foundation to the point where I really looked hard to try to debunk some of the stuff he was saying, and I felt like I did find some things where it felt like he was being too disingenuous just to hammer the nail home. But at the same time, I don't know, like Tom Woods got the book about how the Catholic Church promoted all sorts of like truth and stuff, and I grew up Catholic, and I'm not here to like get into religion at this point in time, but I guess it's interesting how, here's what I'd say. It was like a boss of a boss of a boss back in the day. Someone told someone in my family this quote, or but it was somebody who was doing something at a company within my family, and then the boss was like, if you think about anything long, and if you think about anything long enough, you can justify it. It's only a matter of how long you think about it. And so it seems true because I'm in business in my personal or professional life, and in business, if you do a move in the heat of the moment, or it's crunch time, it's a month-long deal, it's some business thing, and then you got this afternoon to get it done, and you're meeting with these people or something, negotiations go haywire. It feels like if you do something you shouldn't have done, you'll just think about it for forever until you justify it. Like that's the notion of how business is done, it seems like, and that's where like the Gordon Geckos come from, and like, but I feel like it's a real phenomenon. So I don't know. Do you first of all on that? Do you have anything to say about that?
I mean, I think it's a natural reaction to defend one's own preconceived notions about any topic innately, as a responsive nature. I used to call Lincoln my favorite president. I grew up, learning about Honest Abe, that this guy was the best president in history.
Right.
But I've come to realize that's not true. And just another thing with this is that Lincoln was willing, and he said this in correspondence that you can read today, that if he could save the Union without freeing a single slave, he would do that too.
Yep.
And that was largely consistent with federal policy, because the federal policy of the government from the 1820s forward was a policy that sanctioned slavery through the 1820 Compromise, which made Missouri a slave state, through the Kansas and Nebraska Act, and through the Compromise of 1850. I mean, it had been the inclination of the federal government to support the legitimacy of expansion of slavery.
When people were comparing, or even himself, but like the whole Barack Obama, Abraham Lincoln, there was these comparisons on different levels and stuff. What made me laugh was the people, and I don't know if it was like the Rhino conservatives or what made me laugh were the people that were offended that there could be any comparison between Barack Obama. Like, let's call these a certain group of people who very much are anti-Barack Obama. I don't know. Whatever party, make it up, millions of people in different demographics or something. I don't know. But the people who really don't like Barack Obama, a large percent of them were offended in the sense that anytime they'd compare him to Lincoln, I bet it was more than 50% of the, registered Republicans. They were offended. And I'm like, why? Did you feel like that? I'm sure you've heard that narrative. And did you feel the same thing? Where you'd sit there and you'd go, why? I mean, it must be only out of ignorance, historical ignorance, about the actual provable, simply observable things that Lincoln did and was a part of. And I don't know. I think on that level, and the whole notion of the federal government putting its thumb down in this point in time over the states was a perfect way to compare Barack Obama to anybody. So the people that consider themselves maybe voting members of the Republican Party that thought that, I don't know, I felt very, arrogant towards them. I mean, I felt like I could laugh at them is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
I felt like I elevated myself to be a little narcissistic or whatever, where I actually was laughing. Like, are you stupid, It makes me seem like a dick, but whatever. I mean, I'm just being honest. That's what I felt. So, I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a knee-jerk reaction to want to defend that guy above all other politician in the United States history. People associate the lineage of the Republican Party with Lincoln. He was the first Republican president.
Yeah.
But he wasn't a good example of what Thomas Jefferson would call Republican tendencies.
No.
At all. So, absolutely.
What sucks about the word Republican is that in the Founding Fathers sense of it, meaning a republic under... unified common law, basically, right? I mean, common law was the Magna Carta really the first observable, like, written down, communicable, massive document that revolted against... it revolted against the divine right of kings, right?
Sure.
But there obviously was other non-common law all around the world that wasn't called divine right of kings. But
sure.
The Western tradition... That's what I always...
in English tradition, it certainly was.
Sure.
You can cite the Charter of Liberties of 1100.
See, I don't know a lot about that.
But that was basically a king saying that he would no longer be
who was
tyrannical.
That? Yeah.
I believe Henry.
Dude, okay, I did...
William the Conqueror's...
All right. I couldn't name it. No, I couldn't name it. But I have heard of that thing, because I'm sitting here... And then before 1100, man, I don't know. I don't know.
But see, the Magna Carta was the first...
If you're listening, the 5 people that listen to this, man, this is Geek Fest 2014.
Well, the Magna Carta signed in the fields of Runnymede by King John in 1215 was the first document that constrained the authority written by other people that wanted to check the king's power. They were barons. They rebelled against King John for various reasons.
And when they did that... Was it very similar to 1776, where it took it had to have taken a long time for a lot of those ideas to become... I don't know if the word is ratified or, put into place, observable through human action, meaning people are actually acting that way, doing those things. I don't know. Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, it was a path of transgression. In John's case, he levied what the people considered to be the most callous atrocity of their time, and that was...
Damn it!
And that was
I'll figure it out. We'll get
and
back
that was
to
an income tax.
ComedyCentral.com.
They believed that an income tax was the biggest attack on liberty that could possibly happen, and King John made the first income tax that was levied on an English people.
When?
He also, in the early 13th century.
That was the first income tax on the English people?
Yes. Before that, it was considered a travesty against liberty. He also did other things like try to pick the Archduke of Canterbury above what the people wanted. The people wanted a guy named Stephen Langton, and he wanted to pick a guy named John de Grey, and his choice was shunned both by the Pope and the people, and he had to answer for that. So
dude, shunned by the Pope and the people sounds like a Talking Heads song.
Maybe we can
I'm going to write... the 3 people that listen to this... Fucking the shunned by the Pope and the people, dude. That's amazing.
Trying to be artsy fartsy with it, I guess. I don't know.
No, but so anyways, the in the 1300s, they wrote this stuff down, and they said that basically your rights are unalienable. I don't know what terms they would have used 500 years before or whatever, but basically the idea of rights is because you're a living, breathing human being. You're part of this human race, which has some cognition of what it is that's beyond what every other animal has. Mm-hmm. So instead of defining it as you are dependent on another class of human beings, you're basically... you own yourself, right? I mean, is that true? I mean, you can, if I'm cutting a line that's too direct and I'm missing a few of the points that tie it together, I mean, you can say it. Otherwise, you can just agree or disagree. I don't know, but
no, I think that's generally true. The point of it is that John didn't recognize any limitations to his own authority, and it only took his signage of this document to constrain him. It warded the people against taxation by royal prerogative. It also made it so that due process rights were enjoyed. Our definition of due process comes from 1215. It comes from what they call Chapter 39 of the Magna Carta, where it says that people can't be held indiscriminately and arbitrarily because of the king's whims. So
amazing. 500 freaking years of this human development in, I'll call it, morality and the general understanding of basic economics, not necessarily barter and trade, but the way human economics, the way that you perceive threats, coercion, what's justified into using coercion against someone else. A lot of these things are the most powerful things that dictate who we are and what we do. And yet just basic dialogue about this should be, to me, it feels like I become more in tune with who I am and who everyone else is when you talk to people who are really interested in this type of stuff. And then you realize why people would fight and die for this type of stuff. And then today, not today, but, in today's world, it feels like it's harder and harder to just get on the level to understand these concepts. And what's funny to me is when you start really understanding a concept and its complexities, and it's a different concept that you identified with in the past, that transition, it seems so seamless. You arrive at this other conclusion, and then it's like you look back on yourself 3 years ago or something, and you don't see what happened. It's like getting better at shooting 3-pointers or kick flipping off of a skateboard ramp. You look back 3-4 years and you go, oh my goodness, man! Like,
I'm a recovering neocon, so I certainly see that. Trust me, I am. I've gone through rigorous treatment. There's an 11-step process, but.
Real quick before we start this video again, recovering neocons, because I grew up. I grew up in the suburbs. I identified with more city stuff. I was always involved in city stuff growing up, but at the same time, like my family, they're like, I call them mountain hicks. They're from out west, and they're the most amazing people. Both sides of the family, they're amazing, and they're all just quirky. Some of them build cars and airplanes and stuff from scratch type stuff. Some climb Mount Kilimanjaro. My grandma climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, like all kinds of crazy stuff. But I don't know, like at the same time, being from the city, like you get a different perspective, I guess, on stuff is what I'm trying to say. So as I get older, a lot of the views, they change, and I don't know. I guess I'm just rambling on about a transition.
No, it's true. You have to change. Once you're presented with uncounterable evidence to the contrary of your own views, you have to adapt.
I get tongue-tied, but
humanity's made to adapt.
That's exactly what it is, man. It's like, if you don't get tested, that's what we're saying. It's my stupid kickflip analogy or whatever. It's probably correct, because, if you don't test it, if that board's not flipping off the ground and coming up and hitting your face or your shins, or, if you're not testing yourself, then you won't have that experience ever where you look back 3 years and you go, I remember when I was just ollieing off of these like 2-foot ramps. And then all of a sudden you're kickflipping, and it's because of all those times that you were testing yourself. And to tie it back before we hit the Daily Show, that's what the dialogue portion, I think, is if you don't freaking test yourself on these subject matters, if you're afraid of being called a racist because you challenge Lincoln, who's all the freaking evidence is, unless you're a nationalist religious, and I use those words, smash them together. I'm saying, like, if you buy into the nationalist paradigm in the religious sense, meaning like it's bestowed upon you in a cultural traditional sense and you have to identify with it, then you'll never understand Lincoln. And that's why people like Mr. Dave Benner here helped me out, because in the sense that you look at what's actually going on, the motives, and then even the quotes, the writings, and even the political legislation to write what would have been the 13th Amendment or whatever. Yeah. When you look at that stuff, the picture is already painted for you. And so it's hard, because you come to the conclusion once you look at history that some of the stuff that you're taught is so different that you risk. That's the same thing as kick flipping and getting hit in the shins and bleeding.
I call it swallowing the red pill, to make a Matrix analogy.
I hate using. I love that. That's my favorite analogy in the world. But I also hate it, man, because then I assume I have all this truth.
Wait a minute.
Anyways, let's start this back up. I assume I have all this truth, but I want the red pill. I want it. Here we go. Now we started where we left
off.
off.
You would support a slave rebellion as being just, but not the federal government. If there is ever any real use of federal power that would be justified, would it not be to end the most horrific, abhorrent practice?
We already kind of went over this.
Mankind.
We disagree that.
Tried
Here we go.
everything else, like abolishing the Fugitive Slave Act, which Lincoln enforced and his judges enforced and his federal marshals enforced until the Civil War was over and Lincoln was nearly dead.
Slave trade was outlawed in 1808.
1808, yes.
England outlawed it in what? 1833.
1833.
How much longer
Brazil
do
out-
people have to wait for it to die a natural
He mentions
death?
Brazil.
Outlawed it. Sweden outlawed
Brazil
it.
outlawed it
Norway.
in 1890, I think.
Norway outlawed
1888.
The northern states, all of which had slaves, outlawed it. It
Right.
was on its way out, and Lincoln.
Why is the onus on Lincoln and not on the southern states? They seceded.
because the South-
They seceded. Lincoln did not secede.
Do you have anything to say there on his point and
Yeah.
why it's
Lots of
Go
stuff.
ahead.
I mean,
Okay.
Lincoln did not use slavery as a cause to invade the South in 1861. He used secession.
Right.
And secession is a mentality that was not foreign to the founders. The founding generation seceded
big
twice.
point? I mean, massive point.
In the first case,
That's what the whole foundation of the country is seceding because there's the idea of liberty may be more localized, but it's more pure. So you want to fight for that idea in a more local level.
Sure. In the case of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson makes it known that what he's doing is just listing the reasons that, quote, impel them to the separation. That's what a secession is. It's simply a withdrawal or separation. It's not this subversive mentality that you're inevitably counting on going to war. The next example, of course, is when the Constitution was ratified, because the founding generation in the states decided to leave their government framework. The Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union is the name of that document, and they consciously decided to ratify that by 1781. So it wasn't a foreign issue. As far as Lincoln, the onus was on Lincoln because he violated the Constitution in a few ways, and I'll just quickly say this before we move on.
Take as much time as you want, man.
All right.
This is important, yeah.
In 1861, Lincoln knew that it would be an incendiary action to resupply Fort Sumter. Nonetheless, he did so
Where was
against a port off of South Carolina. It's
Okay.
a small island. It was a federal fort.
Okay.
And basically, the South had sent negotiators to try to buy all federal property. At peace.
Negotiators.
Yeah. Through peaceful means. Lincoln did not want to do this. Even Winfield Scott, the commanding general of the Union at that time, wrote Lincoln a famous letter saying, "Let our southern sisters leave in peace. Let our wayward sisters leave in peace." His Secretary of State, William Seward, urged him not to resupply this fort. Nonetheless, he did so, and he knew that the South would then fire on the fort and consider it, a hostile action.
Mm-hmm.
Lincoln later wrote in his diary that the resupply of Fort Sumter achieved what he had always hoped to be, and that was eventual war. And
But the
that's why
Battle
people
of
call it
Fort
Lincoln's War.
Sumter, how did it end up?
The South won. There were literally no casualties. I think there was one horse that
Wait.
died.
So they literally built up a ghost town. I mean, not a ghost town, but they bounced out of there. Then they shelled this town. They destroyed it. Then the newspapers in their penmanship, right? Fort Sumter was just obliterated. And then the North was like, we had this massive fort that housed like thousands of people.
I don't know if they stretched it to that extent, but the real travesty happened about
But how
a month
often do
later.
you hear, I mean, even in Benghazi, like key people are getting
Exaggerations.
murdered and stuff. That's what's so amazing to me, man, is back then, the false flag mentality. And here's my example of false flag, because there's so much false flag. I mean, everything's a false flag. It always has been. And so you get into like Oklahoma City and all these things where it's proven, but I don't even want to get in there because then you get into this realm of like, oh, everything's, the most elite group. And well, there's always levels. But my favorite is like in Rome, the best economic thing about Rome to understand about the fall is they call it unfunded liabilities. And that's why Rome fell, is a spreadsheet, and eventually they couldn't produce enough for their unfunded liabilities, which included military pay, pensions, like paying farmers. I mean, land. I mean, everything
Bread and
was
circuses.
and then it became the gladiators, and that's what people don't get is the end of Rome. We don't have to get into this too much, but the end of Rome was the freaking gladiators. I mean, that wasn't when Rome was at its like strongest, when it was just. It wasn't an NBA player who's 25, 26, like at his, can jump the high, Vince Carter type stuff. It was at Vince Carter now, who's awesome, but he's on his way out. Like,
He's a great slam dunker in his time.
God, Vince Carter's awesome. God, I love Vince Carter. But anyways, the fire departments in Rome, when they couldn't get paid, it's a famous fault. It's one of the most famous false flags ever, and you have to translate it to how the state functions when it's really not producing. And this country is what, as Peter Schiff likes to say. So this fact is loosely based, but 70% consumption, 30% production is what they call the United States. In Rome, the fire departments, these guys are public pension, everything public. and then all of a sudden no one's funded, and they used to go around when they were going to get cut and set fires on different parts of Rome. And that's like a analogy, that's one of my favorite analogies, because I mean it's freaking bread and circuses, and it's like the ultimate easily looked at false flag or whatever.
Sure.
So I don't know,
But-
you look like, just talk, man. I feel like I
think
touch on
you
3
make a good
points, so
point.
yeah, go
You
ahead.
make a good point. Before we move on in the clip, I just want to say that it was after the Fort Sumter incident that really the most egregious action transpired, in my estimation. And that's after Fort Sumter, that is the action that caused several states just to succeed. Virginia, Tennessee, and Arkansas included in that mix. So they only did this after Lincoln's actions of resupplying the fort. The other thing is that...
So it was kind of a false flag, right?
In a way, I mean, you can make the argument.
I'm not saying...
The South
good
did
point.
fire on the fort.
I'm not
but,
saying
yeah.
I know enough to, like, say...
Lincoln knew it would cause this.
Right, like it was it's like a pawn in chess.
Right.
Right? I mean, isn't that kind of what... No matter what side you're on, wasn't that looked at as like a moment that didn't mean a lot, but it drew a massive conclusion?
Lincoln wrote in his diary plainly that it achieved the desired result. You can take a look at that. But the biggest thing is after that, Lincoln decided to raise a $75,000 man-strong army with the sheer intent to invade the South. And he did this when the Congress was in recess, by the way. He unilaterally decided to raise an army, and all the southern states knew it was with the intention to literally invade the South. Now, the Constitution says he can't do this. The Constitution says that in the Constitution... in Article 1.
Section...
in Article 1,
8?
Section 8, the Congress...
I called it...
You did call it. The Congress has the authority...
I don't know much more of that.
The Congress has the authority to suppress insurrections, but it doesn't give the president that authority. And Lincoln's argument was always that secession was illegitimate. So Lincoln wanted his cake, to eat his cake and to have it too. He always treated the southern states as if that secession was illegitimate so he could maintain regulatory forces over it, but also treated the South like a foreign power for the purposes of blocking their ports and invading them as a foreign country. But the Constitution never gave sanction to this at all.
Now, I want to touch on this because I think you might know a lot about it because you love this shit. But I want to touch on it after this clip if it's legit.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to say is Lincoln had a plan to literally use public money to round up every slave or black person and bring them to Africa. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Hold on. Okay, wait, say it in 1 or 2 sentences. No more, though. This is too much fun
Lincoln,
for me.
throughout the entirety of his presidency, was always trying to find new and interesting ways to deport the slaves to Liberia. Up to his last day.
All right, so done. And I guess, like, a lot of the black friends I had growing up that were connected to Africa, like with a family, whatever. I don't know what the right term would be, but I get now it's look at white dude trying to use black term, but no, I don't give a fuck. Basically, like the African American or black friends I had that were more tied to their African heritage, they fortunately understood, luckily, whatever, where they were from without a DNA test or whatever, And I say this with nothing but the absolute sincere most love, because I always think about like friends I grew up with that were black and the ones that have this instant connection to family that they're related to back in Africa, and then the ones that were absolutely denied, name changed, no idea where they're from. And with modern technology, that's what excites me. Believe it or not, one of the things, just as a regular ass white dude, that excites me the most about reading about DNA is when they test you and you can be the descendants of people who were abused, shipped off to another country, whether you're black, white, or frickin', the darker Italians, or just people in history that were denied where they were from, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And to me, that's the most frickin' amazing thing about DNA, is that you grow up with people, and some people know exactly where they're from and some people don't, and the ones who don't, now with technology, they're liberated in a sense, hopefully, where they can find out that stuff really quick. And so someone who is literally from this terrible lineage of slavery might be able to, within for a small amount of money and a little bit of their time and a vial of their blood, or I don't know, but maybe they can find out where they're from. And to me, I don't know, I'm just elaborating on what I think might be this positive silver lining in the clouds of a lot of the most horrific things in our most recent 250 year history. It'd be amazing to see people who thought they wouldn't have hope to figure out their lineage and then be able to find it through DNA testing. And then you go to frickin' Coon Rapids and someone in a trailer park, that doesn't give two shits, and they could find out everywhere they're from and meet awesome ancestors, but they just don't care.
Sure.
So I guess my point is the great equalizer or something, So I don't know. That was an interesting Mage Productions rant, I guess, but no, I believe, to me, that's just always been something that just touches me so deeply. Is like Doug Stanhope, one of my favorite comedians. He talks about people that get parts of culture from their family, but then it holds them back. And he's like, it's your problem if you can't figure out how to deal with it. Because he's like, that's dead people's baggage and you don't need it. Like, it's amazing to use it to your advantage to figure out where you're from and what those people were about. But then if you let it hold you back, it's the opposite. So I don't know. It's one of those things, I guess, where I don't know how in touch you are with your ancestors or anything like that.
Almost not at all. I don't care about my lineage, to be honest. All I care about is my humanity and my liberty, to be honest. So I can see why people would be intrigued, but I feel no
intrigue
connection
is exactly
to,
what
to
I
any
am.
nation, I would say.
But I think, I guess my point is I'm the opposite of someone who's born in America, whose whole family's from Italy. They're born in America and they're suburban Minneapolis as you or me or something. And then they're always like, oh, I'm this because I'm Italian. That is what I'm anti. I think that's just fake. But what I'm pro is understanding. There's a street song. I forget what song it is, but it's basically the streets, the rap group from England. You probably don't know. It's interesting.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you...
Are you serious or no? Oh, they're big
all.
time. They're weird, though, but you should check them out. But there's a song, and it's kind of powerful because he's like, whenever you feel down, or I'll butcher everything, but remember, everyone before you was the strongest, Like, no matter how depressed you feel, no matter how... I'm going to quit this or whatever, you almost owe it to yourself always. You almost owe it to yourself always, because everyone who made it before you, they made it. They were, natural. I mean, I guess you could have impregnated a woman, then died, and then she had your kid. So technically your kid is older than you, but whatever. But anyway.
This was the best segue.
No, I try to kill segues. Dude. No, you can tell.
It's interesting.
I just love to just go up. Before I started clip, no, we were talking about. I guess. Well, go ahead. You feel like you.
Yeah, just one thing before we move on.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
In Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, the Constitution makes it known that it is a federal obligation to protect each of them against invasion, and it's referring to the states. All the language in the Constitution refers to the states in the plural. It never says it. Yeah, it's always they or them. It shall protect them against invasion and on application of the legislature or of the executive against domestic violence. So the federal government in Lincoln's time had the obligation to protect the South from its own invading forces, ironically enough, but under the Constitution. But we can move on.
Different.
It's just something to think
I know. It's just so
something to think
different. Today, I mean, it's insane. All right, let's just play this. God, let's
do it.
Everything's flip-flop, so I'm trying to say.
Rebellion as being just.
All right, listen.
But not the federal government. If there is ever any real use of federal power that would be justified, would it not be to end the most horrific, abhorrent practice in the history of mankind?
After it had tried everything else, like abolishing the Fugitive Slave Act, which Lincoln enforced and his judges enforced and his federal marshals enforced until the Civil War was over and Lincoln was nearly dead.
Slave trade was outlawed in 1808?
1808, yes.
England outlawed it in what, 1833?
1833.
How much longer do people have to wait for it to die a natural death?
Brazil outlawed it. Sweden outlawed
Brazil
it.
outlawed it in 1890, I think.
Norway outlawed
1888.
it. The northern
Here's
states,
about
all of
the
which
punchline with
outlawed
John
it.
Stewart. Here we go.
It was on its way out, and Lincoln...
Why is the onus on Lincoln and not on the southern states?
Boom.
They seceded. They seceded. Lincoln did not secede.
Producer put the applause meter light on, and everyone clapped.
Before he took office. consequences of
The Southern states perpetuated this immoral system. I have no praise for them whatsoever. But Lincoln could have undone it without spending $6.6 billion and causing the death of 785,000 human beings.
How many deaths of human beings were caused by the American slave trade?
Unfortunately,
How
probably
many?
1.5 million.
Try 5 million or more.
Whatever the number
Nobody
is,
counted.
whatever the number is, the slave trade is to be condemned. It was over in Lincoln's infancy. The slave trade, as you just pointed out, was outlawed in 1808 by the terms of the Constitution.
No,
So
but
Lincoln's job is to stop the slave trade in the U.S., which he could have done financially and legally, and he didn't. Look, if a slave escaped from South Carolina to Massachusetts, the burden was on Massachusetts authorities and Massachusetts individuals at their own expense to return that slave.
Boom.
And
one of the
Lincoln
grievances
put
that the South
people
put up
in
with.
jail who refused to do that. Lincoln could have stopped enforcing it. Lincoln could have.
I have to
squeezed the
pause
South-
it here
Right,
before because just the Fugitive Slave Act, right? Were you going to talk about the Fugitive Slave? I'll just let
Yeah.
you talk about it because
Okay.
That's exactly what that's
In
about.
1850, as part of the so-called Compromise of 1850, the government passed a law which made it a crime for Northerners to not assist federal marshals on the basis of hearsay from taking accused slaves and delivering them straight back to their masters in the South.
Amazing.
So basically,
sounds fake.
there'd be lofty
it's-
claims by these slave owners where they basically went up to these northern states and said, "That's my slave."
Yep.
And on that basis, the federal marshals were to be assisted not only by state officials, but by state individuals to return that slave. So these people's rights were clearly being impeded, and the federal government enforced this vigorously. You know, it was just a travesty. And you see that the northern states started to nullify the Fugitive Slave Act, like Wisconsin.
I
Yes.
always use that's my mom's even heard that, man. I mean, that's my example. I'm just like, that's the difference of could you define federalism in the 1700s? I mean, it meant something different, didn't it? Or no?
Well, yes, absolutely. Because what we think of federalism today,
Exactly, that's what I'm
basically,
getting at.
if you say federal, people refer that to like a national government, right? Like
Yes.
Washington D.C. But back in that time, federalism was a system that respected local
Yes.
relative sovereignty, where localities had more powers than whatever they considered to be a national or general authority.
Like local trumps national. It was the idea stemming from Magna Carta, 1776. It was all the documents that detailed the natural rights of human beings. Those were always like, basically these revolutions, to me, in the most organic sense, and you can say yay, nay, or elaborate, but to me it was like on the NES Nintendo and you hit the reset button. Like the game doesn't stop. You know, the power's on, everything's functioning, but that software, like you got to hit the reset button. And like 1776, I mean, George Washington, there's the conspiracies about the Freemasons killing him and all this, because at the very end of his life, his diaries started to get a lot different. And you read George Washington's diaries, and he just is always like, there's, you know, people are conspiring in the Masonic lodges. They're conspiring with the economic system. And it doesn't, I'm not pinpointing any group here specifically. My point is that you look at these people and they were trying to start something. They were hitting the reset button on the Nintendo.
Yeah.
And they were like, shit's going down here, whether we like it or not. We have a choice. We only have so many days left in our life. We can die in old age without doing anything, or we can go and try to preserve liberty in engineering a system that is the most focused on protecting the people from that system. And so to me, I guess like that idea is permeable eternally. And so therefore why it's so attractive to me to look at these people. And that's why I get so offended. Okay, I hate the word offended. Okay, I'd never get offended. I get so distraught or intellectually unstimulated when someone accuses of like, well, Thomas Jefferson was born on a farm already, a slave owning farm. He inherited a whole farm company from his father, slave owning farm. Oh my God, he did that. He must have no moral compass in the history of the world. He was born in an era. I don't know. To me, it's the same people that are against hunting and they eat factory farm shit all the time. And you're like, really? An organic mountainside elk is way worse than like these chickens that are crammed into a barn I see every day on PETA.com.
Right. There's a lot we can say about Thomas Jefferson's slavery, and really Thomas Jefferson tried to do whatever he could to suppress slavery, even in his own state, going back to his membership in the House of Burgesses. But that might be a different topic. But I think you made the best analogy I've ever heard, hitting the reset.
No, but go ahead.
You did.
Keep talking.
Hitting the reset
Please.
button, because the founding generation realized that revolutionary action would be cyclical. Jefferson, who you just mentioned, wrote one time, from time to time, the tree of liberty must be refreshed with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. So they realized that this was necessary from time to time. They hit the reset button. That was a proverbial button that the founders hit.
Well, and let me elaborate on your elaboration too, and just say I think they did it because when they did identify this as cyclical, they said, I mean, let me quantify or something like you're 10 or 20% before the next revolution, or you're 10 or 20% after, or whatever you can identify. You never know. Some revolutions are every 10 years, some are every 100, but you identify it and you're like, here's my chance in my life to put my foot down and be. You have, in a way, you have three options. You can be pro one cause, pro the other cause in a dichotomous state versus non-state action. Pro the state, anti the state, or do nothing. And I think the people that we always put on the frickin' dollar bills and all that stuff were the people that at the beginning said that they were going to be anti-state. Because the best leader, like, have you ever? Here's what's crazy. Hold on. We can get into all this shit. You're gonna laugh, but Putin. Yeah, I'm not saying he's good. I don't like Putin, but there's a few things that are awesomely, undeniably likable with him. But no, I don't like him. But Putin,
but he can wrestle with tigers and do jujitsu
oh my God.
and stuff. Sorry.
No,
continue.
but I guess what I'm saying is, like, if I can even hold my train of thought. But Putin, when you hear him speak, he says that. Everything he says, they ask anytime it's about him or his term or his position in Russia. You should go on. Anyone that listens to this, the two people left listening to this, go online though and Google like Putin speeches. I'm serious. He basically everything he ties back. They ask him about like how long he's going to be in office, and he says, "Well, it's not up to me." That's his. I mean, he does the right answer on paper, the PR, the public relations answer, and he says it's the democratic process. And let the people speak. I don't care. I don't know. Which is bullshit. Right? I mean, would you agree? Yeah, so it's total bullshit. So what I'm saying is, to me, that's, I don't know, that's that guy has mastered the GYSE guise of that cyclical notion of the state, and he's mastered it. And they always say, if you want to control, you have to predict. Because if you can predict an outcome successfully, then you're the only person in position to control the outcome. And I think Putin's a prime example of that, because he's in that perfect position that he can predict the outcomes, and he has always played himself as a PR rep of himself, to get in the right position. And then they ask him, you're a semi-dictator. No, let the people decide. It's never up to me. I mean, it's amazing.
Lord Acton once said, absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
Yes.
And Madison made it a point in Federalist 51 to basically say that if angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would even be necessary. So we know that there's an inclination for those with power to hold on to it and consolidate power within themselves. It's a natural inclination in government.
Well, amazing. I'm glad you agree with my rants.
Proceed.
All right, there's a little more here. Let's see here.
Financially, Lincoln could have bought the slaves for free.
This is, first of all, buying the slaves' freedom, I think, is not as true as you might believe.
Slaves
he tried to do it in the border states.
Do you real quick have anything to say about buying slaves' freedom or not?
Yeah, manumission of slaves had been proposed by some officials, going back as far as like a decade before the war. Okay. It is true that a lot of the Southerners didn't necessarily want that because of the labor, the continual labor that slaves would give, but it certainly was an option. It certainly was in Brazil and Norway and Sweden and England, like we've talked about. But
okay. Well, do you think it saved death or no?
I'm sorry?
I mean, do you think that if that would have happened to buy him back, it would have saved death?
Oh, yeah. Peaceful
For sure.
manumission
I mean-
of slaves for sure would have stifled the prospects of war, I think. But that wasn't the sheer reason for which
Okay.
the Civil War was fought. For instance...
I mean, I would assume it would, but I just feel like I have to ask because
Yeah.
Jon Stewart here, where I paused it, you can't see it, but his hands outstretched and everything, and he's making an F sound with his lips. His lips are out, and I paused the video, but I mean, he's making this point. I get
Right.
that's why I stopped it, I guess, because I don't know how to address this point. Is what I'm saying, where he's saying that.
Well, he tries to narrow it down to slavery is the reason for the war, and that's the narrative we always get. But
There you go. Good
I
point.
reject that. Let me just give a really short
Absolutely.
counterexample. The Southern people just loathed the tariffs that were levied upon them and cited it as some reasons for which they were withdrawing from the Union. For instance, the moral tariffs, which went into place shortly before Abraham Lincoln's presidency, during the presidency of Buchanan, were considered particularly egregious and much like the ones that had affected the South during the 1828 tariffs, sometimes called the Tariffs of Abomination. And the Southerners believed that this would kill them because it would make them have to reject free trade and instead buy products from the North. So there's other reasons. In South Carolina's ordinance of secession, they cite the very fact that the northern states were starting to line up in nullification efforts against them in the Fugitive Slave Act because, like we talked about, Wisconsin nullified that.
Yeah.
Michigan made it so it was unconstitutional to use their jails to hold these people before their masters could get them. In Vermont, they passed the Habeas Corpus Act, which prohibited individuals and state officials from even assisting the federal marshals. So there's other reasons. But
Amazing. All right. That was great. Let's check this out here.
Offered them money for their slaves in the border states. Those were the ones that had not even seceded yet, and they refused.
The border
And in
states
terms of
didn't secede
economics-
until Lincoln started killing people. Because in the border states, Lincoln's
Lincoln
emancipation...
started killing people because the South. Why is the onus on Lincoln?
Because he fired the shots. Not the first shot. He tricked South Carolina into firing the first shot.
So Lincoln tricked South Carolina. Your vision of the Civil War is Lincoln pulled a fast one on the South.
Yes.
I think-
you believe that as well.
I think Lincoln made that clear in his diary.
There you
I
go.
mean,
You go. You gotta
Lincoln
go.
made that clear in his diary. We talked about it before. There had been people in the North that warned him against this course of action. They knew that it would ignite warfare. They knew the South was not going to let the federal government to establish an invasion island for which they could set up bases for which to invade the South. They just weren't going to let that happen. It was off the coast of South Carolina. This wasn't up in like Maryland or anything like that. So
Good point. And see, that's another point that Stewart has to harp on. Amazing.
But Napolitano was right that Lincoln duped the South into doing that, and that was a treacherous action.
I'm gonna rewind like 10 seconds because I think Napolitano was about to say, and you believe that too. So let's hear.
Your
Hold on.
vision of the Civil War
Let's
is
listen to this.
Lincoln pulled a fast one on the South.
Yes. And you believe that as well.
I do not believe it. I do not even come close to
They pounded
Fist
it.
bump.
Team Mage Tom Wood style. Oh, gross, man. What are they doing? Oh my God, they're making out on this show. I'm just. Well, hold on. He didn't give him a chance to whatever. Okay, for the people. Well, let me just finish this. There's
He
10
resorts to
seconds.
humor when he does
I know.
that
He
one.
has to.
I know what's coming.
No, it's fun.
Absolutely. They're great guys.
They are great guys. We're going to be right back, Chuck.
All right. Well, anyways, if you want to go to Comedy Central or wherever, YouTube, wherever, to check that one out, there's extended interview. I don't think I've even watched it yet, but I will. I love Napolitano. But anyways, I felt like that was a great way to take the meat of the show and at least go through something like that.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah, just one thing before
Yeah.
we may move on from Lincoln is
Yeah.
that one last thing. I think that Judge did a pretty good job. I think he could have approached this from a few different angles, like
Sure.
Lincoln's proponency for the Corwin Amendment that I talked about earlier, but also because Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus specifically in Maryland.
Sure.
And because of this, he just unilaterally decided to arrest legislators so they couldn't convene and potentially withdraw from the Union like the Southern states. And he was condemned by this by the Supreme Court, by the case of ex parte Merriman, the Roger B. Taney Supreme Court said this is unconstitutional. The Constitution doesn't give you the right to do that. And in response, Tom DiLorenzo's book says that 3 corroborating sources support the notion that Lincoln ordered that judge, Roger B. Taney, this Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, to be arrested, although it's not been completely substantiated, but he gives some accounts. The other thing real quick is that Lincoln unilaterally decided to deport his biggest northern rival from the north to the south, and then he eventually went to Canada for a while. Clement Vallandigham was a Copperhead leader from Ohio, and because he spoke out against Lincoln and said that his actions against the South were tyrannical, Lincoln just decided, unilaterally to deport this dude. And this never gets talked about. You never learn about this stuff.
That's like if Obama got a hold of Edward Snowden and he just like put him in Canada and he like somehow could make sure.
He'd love to. I'm sure.
Oh my goodness gracious!
All right, sorry.
That's
had to get into that stuff.
To me, that's this whole podcast. I really wanted to harp on a lot of that stuff. So I mean, if you think of anything in the course, anything else, just you can always go back to that. But one thing that I kind of wanted to transition to, which is almost the same thing, but it's something that Mr. Dave Benner here, to speak about him next to me 3 feet away in the third person in a way, but Dave Benner is a great resource for anybody. Google this dude as far as to understand the dichotomous argument about whether and this is like the mainstream media argument, the elementary school argument, but it's a fundamentally polar opposite opinion. So I mean, the argument will exist for the history that the Constitution is around, and here's the argument: is the Constitution set in stone as a, within the English language, does it detail on your natural rights, and therefore it should never be swayed? You can't amend it, you can't change it. There's a lot of ways you could ask that question. Or the other side, is it here's the quote, a living and breathing document? And so I try to make that as dichotomous as I could. You can never really truly do it because it's the English language. These are adjectives and descriptors and stuff. So, but you get it. You understand what I'm asking. I understand what I'm asking. And, 2 out of 3 people listen to this podcast, they understand what we're asking. So basically, how do you, in the most simple terms, and you can go on for 5 hours, but like simply, you meet someone, you're drinking at a bar, and then they start kind of talking about it, and you can tell that they're not really in tune with the dichotomy here. And even if they are, they maybe not, it's possible they may not understand the sources for their opinion, They just may have an opinion. They don't understand where it would be derived from, one way or the other. So what would you say to that?
So I recently did a half-hour presentation on this recently. So there's a lot to be said, but you hit a good point. So the living document myth is one that we always hear attributed to the Constitution. What you said, that the inclination to believe that the Constitution can't be amended. No, Article 5 is the only way that the Constitution can be amended, and the founders made it darn hard to do so for a purpose. For instance, 38 states in today's union have to do that for an amendment, and 38 states can't even agree on like what's the best breakfast food. Right. I mean, let alone a constitutional amendment. But no, the way that the Constitution was always described from the Philadelphia Convention and onward was one that it enumerated certain specific powers to the federal authority. The rest of the powers would be retained by the states and the people. That was reiterated in the 10th Amendment when it was ratified in 1791 and put into place in the Bill of Rights. That is the way that James Wilson described it from the earliest days of constitutional proponency in his famous State House Yard speech in Pennsylvania, the first state that had a controversial convention to decide whether to adopt it. In Virginia, Edmund Randolph, who was the Federalist proponent of the document, described it as only giving the powers which were, quote, expressly delegated to it. Sure. That's the way that it was always described, and it only was because of judges and politicians decades afterward that, these certain pieces of text within it are supposed to justify almost any behavior. I mean, really, there were people that did that after the convention, like Alexander Hamilton said that the necessary and proper clause justifies the creation of a national bank, but by and large, that mentality was rejected, and that was never the way the Constitution was talked about or described by its proponents.
How far, you mentioned Alexander Hamilton, but how far after Well, when was the Constitution ratified?
1788, the requisite amount of states.
So I mean, that's a 12-year period between the most significant portion of bloodshed, and then is a 12-year period before the most, I don't want to say powerful, but the most directly involved at that time characters came together to form what really is the body of coercion. That's what any government is. Now, they try to do it, in both of our opinion, in the most, either one of the most or the most just and great examples of detailing what it means to be free. Right? And a lot of times this type of speech, when I didn't understand the basis of why these guys did what they did, it starts to sound kind of corny, unfortunately. But there really, to me, wasn't a lot to learn past the point when these guys really detailed the natural rights of people, you know. And once again, you know what? In fact, I'm kind of all over the board like I always am on my podcast, but if you want to talk about natural rights, and we talk about Thomas Jefferson a lot, and we talked about him a little already, but what was he doing that was revolutionary, that was, because he's referred to as like the first classical liberal, or one of the first. I don't know. Would you say he's the first or one of the first?
I wouldn't. I would say John Locke has a great claim to that. Yeah, he was.
Real quick, let me butt in. Although I'm talking the whole time, anyways. But the social contract theory of Locke and stuff, right? Now, did Thomas Jefferson notably subscribe to that? Halfway subscribe to it? Was he like a diehard fan of it?
Oh, he was the biggest fan of Locke. He said that Locke was one of the three greatest men that had ever lived, along with Francis Bacon and Isaac
So
Newton.
You could never, ever, ever call Thomas Jefferson an anarchist in the sense that, or a voluntarist in the sense that he ever made the philosophical transition to say that as a human being, you deserve to be absolutely free.
Correct. He believed on government, but government on a local level, as local as possible.
And that's what I thought, but at the same time, I feel like I can make the mistake and not even be guilty of describing him as like an ultimate voluntarist, or, you know, like I feel like he figured a lot of that stuff out.
Sure. In comparison to Hamilton, to be.
Well, oh my God. Well, that's the thing, is like people that don't know any of these guys, and I'm a novice, but okay, Thomas Jefferson, he's on our money. He's a slave owner. Mm-hmm. He was important. But I mean, if you don't understand the contrast of people in that day and age, then you can't admire someone like him to the same extent. I think is the point I'm trying to make.
To be sure.
If you can't contrast him with the other people of the exact period of time from the different statuses of society and life, you don't understand what a man this guy was. So I don't know.
Yeah, you have to view historical figures within the scope of their own existence, to be sure.
Right.
And that's not to say you can't levy, you know, moralistic judgments on certain individuals for certain things, but you have to take all variables into account when assessing things as a historian.
Is there an argument, or are there arguments about Thomas Jefferson as a person or political figure from people in his day that accused him of any sort of tyrannical judgment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I don't know anything about that type of perspective. So go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest example is the Federalist Plan was completely against that of Jeffersonian's view for America. The Federalist Plan was one which usurped authority and said that the federal government had a lot more authority, really, than what the Constitution said it did.
And Jefferson supported that?
Days. No, Jefferson didn't.
No.
But there were people that on that side that condemned Jefferson. And during Jefferson's presidency, two things really made a lot of people view him as a tyrant, literally. And the first is the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, believe it or not.
Yeah,
which I defend as the best use of $15 million that had ever been stretched to the benevolence of the masses, in my estimation. And Jefferson himself believed that it might be unconstitutional. But people within the North,
but he just did it.
No, the Senate did ratify the treaty, and he was kind of in the minority of those that thought that it was unconstitutional, believe it or not. His Republican Congress, which had been elected in 1800, believed that it was constitutional. The Senate ratified it by a fair margin. But here's the thing why it was controversial is the northern states like Massachusetts decided to...
Oh my God. I just keep getting cut off by
the northern states like Massachusetts decided to talk about possible secession as a result of this, because they knew that there'd be all these new territories that would have new powers and they might not be able to compete as a strong country against them. So you saw Massachusetts actually talk about secession in this time. The other thing is the 1807.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, the other thing is the 1807 Embargo Act, which in my view was the biggest shortcoming of the Jefferson presidency. Was he, in order to stave off war from wars with England and France, decided to enact an embargo. So no ships could literally trade with any other countries throughout the world. This killed the economy of especially Connecticut and Massachusetts.
How do they enforce that, though?
Federal officials would enforce it, and he sent his Secretary of State, James Madison, to assist with the enforcement of it.
But hold on. You said, say it again. What did it do?
It stopped all free, and this is the guy that had pronounced free
they didn't
trade
follow
as the
ships
best
outbound,
maxim.
did they?
Yes, they made sure that ships could not leave the ports, because what he would
so
do,
they secured our ports. They didn't follow them on the seas.
Right. Well, they were locked down, basically.
They basically turned the harbors into cages.
Yeah, and here's the funny
Under
thing.
Jefferson?
Yeah, under Jefferson. And here's the thing. Connecticut and Massachusetts at this time rose up and said, Principles of 98, nullification. We nullify this federal law. It's unconstitutional. And that's the principle that Thomas Jefferson helped construct.
Yeah, what did he do then?
Well, he was able to enforce it to an extent, but otherwise it was overturned by 1809 in the last
Who
days of his
supported that
presidency.
bullshit, though, with him? Did anyone?
Yeah, part of Jeffersonian's Republican faction did, because they believed that if they didn't do it, the other power, for instance, if Massachusetts started trading with Britain, all of a sudden France would believe this to be an incendiary action.
That's why I hold my tongue, man, because he pulled some bitch moves there.
It was the worst part of Jefferson's presidency, and I think he's top 5 president, but that was the downturn.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's why I have to analyze both sides of everything, because that... See, I didn't know about locking down harbors. Yeah. I really didn't know about that.
Embargo Act of 1807, one of the most controversial actions in U.S. history, and we don't get that much education on it.
Well, I don't know. Mage Podcast is this type of stuff is exactly why I do what I do. Dave Benner, I could do multiple podcasts a week with this guy. If you have any questions, you can always holler at me. TEAMAGE. I wanted to ask, just YouTube that, Google it, whatever. Dave Benner, BENNER, check it out. But we're talking about the Federal Reserve here and there, and I just want to know how many Federal Reserve notes totally, if you added them all together, were all your tattoos worth for your entire life.
Oh man, I guess I don't even like to think about this because of the alternative items that I could have purchased for the same price, but.
Two Bowflex machines.
It's in the commercials. It's in the several thousands. So
wow, man. Do you have a favorite tattoo?
Well, the most recent one is Thomas Jefferson.
And tell them about it.
I have Thomas Jefferson.
How long did it take, and how many colors are in it, or whatever? Tell them.
So I have a Thomas Jefferson tattoo on my left calf, on the back of the calf. I guess that is the calf, but it says 1776 there. That took about 3.5 hours. But really, I don't know. My favorite tattoo actually might be one of my kois on my arm. Actually, I like the Japanese style a lot. So
yeah, and is there what prompted you to get that, or just why a koi? I think they're beautiful.
Yeah, I sheerly like the artwork and its association with luck and kind of.
Okay, so it's associated because you were in China for how long?
I went to China once for a month and then another time for a few weeks. So not a lengthy time.
And they have a deep association with koi there, right?
The Buddhist culture has association with koi. Fish in general are good luck and also riches.
Yeah, man. So that's amazing. I always thought it'd be cool to have one because aren't they? This may be an urban legend or maybe just right out of factoids.com or whatever, but aren't koi and goldfish the same?
I think koi and carp are the same, not goldfish.
Oh shit!
I think.
I thought. Wait. Are goldfish and carp this? No, because I thought you could take goldfish and just start putting them in ponds, and they would grow to be 10 pounds.
I can't. I don't know. Sorry.
Mage Podcast, we don't fact check on the air. So next time, we'll come back. We'll have the answer to that. whatever. I think we wanted to before we sign off here. There's a question though from I think it's from Todd or whatever. Yeah. Did you have that pulled? Oh no, I think I pulled it up. Let's check it here. Let me. I got it right here.
Let's do it.
I asked online for questions for Dave Benner. He's a great dude for intricate answers and very interesting and sometimes complex questions. So I think this was Todd, but he said, ask him why he thinks the federal government keeps ruling on state religious issues. For example, like the hanging of 10 commandments in the court, or I can't talk, for the hanging of the 10 commandments in the courthouses, as they do, Yeah. He said, I thought that is expressly forbidden in the First Amendment. What gives? So that's the question, and I don't know if you have, something to say to that, but
yeah. Well, the First Amendment and especially the Establishment Clause makes it explicit that it's a check on the federal government to even intervene in these types of issues of the states. That's how the Bill of Rights was always described from the get-go, is a single check of power on the federal authority. And you can read this in the preamble of the Bill of Rights. It makes that very clear, and this had been the case, even acknowledged, into the Supreme Court case of Barron versus Baltimore in 1833 and beyond, that it was a check against the authority. Now, when the Bill of Rights was ratified, namely the First Amendment, most of the states had official state churches. For instance, Massachusetts and Connecticut had the Congregationalist Church. States like Maryland and Georgia had the Church of England as their official church. So this was never considered controversial at the time.
Wow, I forget.
Yeah, it was.
Wait, the Church of England, though, is that the same
the Anglican
one?
Church.
Is that the same church that was like the biggest one in England?
Yes, the official church.
Because they were even tied into the Bank of England, right? Or no?
The Bank of England was started shortly after William and Mary, but I don't know what religious ties that would have.
But either way, that was when you lived in England, if you were not part of the Church of England, it was tough, right?
At various times, it was considered more controversial than others, but yes, indeed.
So therefore, to come all the way to this continent to be a Quaker or something, right?
Yeah.
And you had two states that were officially Church of England states. Mm-hmm. It didn't necessarily like you. Okay,
more examples.
Okay, there you go. And so either way, my point, I guess, was, I guess I never really realized that it didn't feel like you were hiding out by yourself in the woods ever, even from day one.
Right.
You were entangled into all the complications of all these collectives.
Right, and the test acts. To be a government official, you had to ascribe by religious principles even to be a part of government. And
there you go, yeah.
That was abolished in Virginia pretty early, but not in other states. The other thing on his question is that it's a complete misunderstanding for the federal courts to rule that, you have to take this cross that's embedded in a shrubbery or architecture, or remove the 10 Commandments from a courthouse, because those issues were always left to the states. It wasn't for the federal government to be able to rule on that. And this whole notion of separation of church and state is such a warped one to me, because people derive that as a comment from a Thomas Jefferson letter to the Danbury Baptists of Connecticut in 1802. And all Jefferson was saying upon inquiry was, I abide by the same principles I always have, and that's that government will not intervene into your churches. Not that religion has no part in government whatsoever. And
right.
I mean, it's become so warped. People have tried to twist Jefferson's words to justify removal of religious objects, and that was never what he was going for. It's just the inclination of power. And what the person asked is, why is this happening? Well, I think it's generally just because the general inclination and tendency for government is to try to assume more and more powers unless there's a force of opposition to that tendency.
What I think is crazy to me is that with the initiation of the income tax in 1913, when you have churches and religious, with bunny ears around them, religious institutions that are tax exempt, the separation of church and state in the modern sense, or the revisionist history modern sense, where you look at back then and you say what they meant was that the government can't even acknowledge a religion.
All right. The federal government could establish one or fund one.
You can't even acknowledge it. And so I don't know. I just look at that, and that seems appealing to me, because I think of it as like, well, that seems objective. But then you kind of look back at what they were saying, and you go, before the income tax, religion was easily a lot more viewed as just a product of the mental, the emotional, the spiritual free market of individuals. So everyone has a different culture. They eat different foods. They wear different dress. They speak a different language, and they worship different gods, and 1 God, 0 gods, 50 gods. And so it was a product of free interaction of ideas, goods, and services. It was the private and local economies of culture of people. And so that's why now, especially after hearing people like you, especially you, and people that can help shape my views of what really was going on in the late 1700s and stuff like that, it makes it so much more clear of what Thomas Jefferson was referring to as a separation of church and state, but was only a small snippet that's been blown up today. Was one thing he said, when really it was that the government can't start mandating based on that collective, which is the same way that when you apply for a firearm permit every time you buy a gun or whatever, and they ask you your ethnicity and shit, and you go, why the fuck does that matter? And you go, that's the same thing as the separation of church and state in the colonial terms, because they were saying as soon as the government starts mandating different things based on a collective, whether it's your race, your gender, your ethnicity, any of that, that's classism, racism, sexism. That is what they call tribalism. But when a tribalism is on a federal level or a national, whatever, government level, a state level, then it's forced collectivism. Right. They're using force based on collectives that are arbitrarily agreed upon. And even if it's democratically arbitrarily agreed upon, then all you have is mob rule. Right. And so either way, that's what a republic in the old sense, to kind of do full circle here, the old sense of the word Republican that existed for, I'm just making this up, 50 years, 100 years in that sense, whatever. And nowadays you have 200 years or less, or more, 200, at least 100 years. The modern Republican sense, that meant nothing what it did in the late 1700s, early 1800s. So I don't know if you have anything to sharpen the edges up of what I said there, but the old form of Republican meaning something that doesn't even mean today, basically.
Right. Yeah, you were right. Democracy is mob rule. It means like 51% of people can out-legislate the rights of 49%.
Yeah.
In republics, people are represented by individuals, and minority factions retain their rights. And it's out of virtue that this is the case. That's why the Republican form of government is the one that was considered the most, the best form of government to the founding generation. In fact, Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution makes it known that in the guarantee clause, they call it, that the United States guarantees to each state a Republican form of government. For instance, in the Federalist Papers, I believe there's 6 references to democracy, and they're all spoken about in the negative, I guess, written about in the negative. So, indeed.
And that was Jefferson, John Jay, or not Jefferson,
James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton.
Sorry, not Jefferson. Yeah, John Jay, Hamilton, and Madison.
Yes, they wrote those for New York newspapers.
And where did they live?
Yeah, Jay was from New York, Hamilton from New York, and Madison from Virginia.
That's right.
That was written because those people knew, as proponents of the Constitution, that the Constitution would be extremely controversial in New York. So they focused all their efforts to explain this. And ironically enough, 10 states had actually ratified. The requisite amount of states was 9 by the time that New York ratified. So the Federalist Papers are, to my estimation, a little bit overemphasized in the grand scheme of things, but that doesn't mean I don't point to them a lot as far as the understanding of those 3 people. And
was it because there was so much story involved with it, or not story, but the lore of 3 massive characters and their chain of letters? I mean, it just kind of almost had to be that big of a deal.
They were some of the most famous figures in the entirety of the U.S., and they had to produce these.
It's like Bieber is writing a letter to Paul McCartney, who wrote a letter to I
don't know about that, but another thing
Floyd Mayweather
forced these guys
I don't know.
Is that the powerful attacks of the opponents of the Constitution, like Patrick Henry and John Lansing and Luther Martin and Richard Henry Lee, were making all these, some of them well-crafted writings which opposed the Constitution.
And Patrick Henry, what was he saying?
Patrick Henry said that the executive would become like a king, and that this government gives the Congress all power.
So if I got a tattoo, I should get a tattoo of Patrick Henry.
Hey, I have no qualms against Henry, and a lot of the opponents and anti-federalists were some of the most prophetic in seeing actually the problems that would occur.
Isn't that amazing, though? I mean, these guys were
prophetic.
They died basically never knowing what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And then if they could see today, I mean, who knows? They'd be proud of themselves, and they'd also, they'd want to kill themselves again.
Oh, yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I mean, oh, my God.
I always say that the anti-federalists were right in understanding the problems that would occur under this government, but to me, it wasn't the Constitution and its ratification understanding that did that. It was the overreach of federal government that did that.
Absolutely. Was there something called the Anti-Federalist Papers?
No, that is a term that's been attributed to a subset of different writings. There's no official publication.
There's not like a... Okay.
There's not. There is collections called that,
Okay.
but all they do is lump together various Anti-Federalist
awesome,
writings, like the Brutus writings, the Old Whig writings, Agrippa, Sentinel, all the famous Anti-Federalist writings.
I need to read every one of those. Oh my God.
It should be read alongside with the Federalist to get the best understanding of the Constitution.
Well, I think we're about to wrap this up. Let's wrap this up. But honestly, hey, Team Mage Productions, Team Mage Studios, from the bottom of my heart, man, thanks again for vice versa, for doing each other's podcasts, for helping each other, for educating each other, and for really, most importantly, feeding off each other. Not just food, but ideas, I know I'm playing. But no, I mean, it's people like Dave Benner, I mean, they help make my life and hopefully the people around me exist with more meaning. And I think some of my favorite things to do in life are interact with people that can help enrich it through the exchange of ideas and from challenging each other. Like, what was my stupid analogy? Kick flipping and hitting your shins and you're bleeding. But if you don't do that, you'll never be able to look back and see all the progress you made. And I think that's what it's about, is if there's this corny analogy, and I'm not going to be able to even cite the article or what it said, but there was an article, you're growing up, always set goals, set the bar high, set goals, right? But I've been reading, and it was more than one article, but I read one maybe a few weeks ago, and it said something about like, fuck goals, processes. If you have a process, if you can use what you've understood in your life, if you understand where you want to go, all that, you don't have to have a goal, because a goal is a set outcome, whereas a process is something you think you do every day. You work towards something, and you don't even know where you're going to end up. And to me, every time I read something that kind of refreshes that perspective, it makes me feel a little better about, I like to sleep in, but when I can on the weekends. But, you wake up every day, and usually I wake up and I'm like, let's do this. I'm usually pretty optimistic right out of bed. But sometimes, you just, today I just wish I could sleep in. But the more that I think you respect your process, the easier it is to get out of bed every day. If you kind of understand your process, not the goal, you don't know where you're going to end up. And that's why I think stop worrying about where your goals, man. Get your processes down.
Live in the now.
Live in the now, If you want to paint a picture, don't even worry about finishing it. If you want to read a book, open in the frickin' middle. Get the Federalist Papers. Read John Jay, the New Yorker. Whatever, man. I don't know. That's the moral of this podcast. So once again, Dave Benner, man, thanks for coming over. Thanks for doing the podcast. Team Mage Productions, Team Mage Studios. I hope you can come back soon for sure. And everyone else, peace out. Say something.
Signing out. Thanks, man. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Absolutely. Peace.
Peace.